of dissenters, rational dissenters. And they grew and they flourished, and the law changed to allow them to have more of an independent existence. And by the 1750s, a remarkable minister came here called Richard Price, who practically nobody in England has heard of, but Americans who know their history have heard of him because he was really influential in the intellectual underpinnings of the American Revolution. So all sorts of people were drawn to Newington Green, like Benjamin Franklin, Tom Paine, the radical who went back and forth between England and America, John Adams, the second president of the United States when he was being an ambassador here in the 1760s and 70s, he would come here. So there was an intellectual ferment around Newington Green, and it was a different place even then. It was well outside the city of London, and it had its own ethos for the people that had gathered around these dissenters. So, one person who came here in the 1780s was a young school teacher named Mary Wollstonecraft. She was 25 years old. She'd had a hard childhood and upbringing, a violent father, bully an older brother, no proper education, moved around a lot, chops and changes. Her mother was beaten into submission. Mary didn't want that kind of life for herself. She knew the only way that she could stay out of it was to not marry, because in that time married women gave all their rights over their body, their property, the clothes on their back, the money they earned to their husbands. She didn't want to marry, but she had to support herself. So she turned to the only thing she could do. She tried sewing, she tried being a governess, she tried being a companion to an older woman, a rich widow, and she hated all of those subservient roles. So she decided to set up her own school, which she could do with no PGCEs, no education yourself, just set up a school. So she did that in Islington. And then somehow she was found by this wonderful fairy godmother called Mrs. Bird. And she was the widow of an educationalist who had made his school here on Newington Green. It's no coincidence that the pub on the opposite side of Newington Green is called the Dissenting Academy. It's the only pub I know named after an educational institution. And the dissenting academies were sprinkled throughout England. And in the 18th century, they offered the best education going, better than Oxford and Cambridge, morally as well as intellectually, because they taught natural sciences, philosophy, mathematics, all sorts of things, not just Latin and Greek and theology. They taught everything that could be explored. So there were several dissenting academies around here. Mary fell in with this wonderful woman who said, come to Newington Green, set up your school here, and I will help you rent a house, find pupils, get yourself established here. And the only way that a single woman could rent a house would be under the auspices of some very respectable person, because otherwise it would be considered a brothel. There's no respect whatsoever for a woman on her own. So she did that. She came here with her best friend. And her best friend has the unfortunate name of Fanny Blood, but these days we call her Frances instead. Were they lovers? Were they girlfriend? Were they best friends? They had devoted their lives to each other. They said they wouldn't marry, that they would live and work and establish a life together. They did that. They helped one of Mary's many siblings, a younger sister who was in an abusive marriage. Mary helped her run away in a closed carriage, and her sister was biting her wedding ring with anxiety. Very dramatic. They made it up here. They had to be, quite circumspect, because if the husband had found out where they were, he could have just come and taken them back. And so they set up a school here. And the years that Mary spent here were really a kind of turning point in her life. Because up to that point, there was nothing in her life story that would lead you to expect great things of her. But when she came here, the people that she met recognized that there was something special in her. They said, you have a book in you. We believe in you. They kept her in their conversational surroundings. There were no places to meet in those days. She wouldn't have gone down the pub. There was no lovely patisserie next door and ciabattas and everything. It's the church or nothing. The church or other people's sitting rooms. And so she did go to other people's sitting rooms, conversation and so on, but she's a businesswoman. She's busy running her school. So this is really where she heard the things that made her mental world expand. Then she left, various things happened, the school folded. But a few years later, her mentor, Richard Price, this amazing minister, who by that point was quite a frail old man. He was always very gentle and kind. People really liked him as a person. He spoke out about liberty from the English Civil War, drawing parallels to the American Revolution. And of course, the American Revolution, these were not the king's favorite people, shall we say, right? They were trying to, break away from British authority. And here was this church minister saying, you know what, they've got a point. Everybody has rights, and we should allow them to govern themselves. So Mary hears all this. She springs to his defense when he gets attacked by various people at Edinburgh. And she writes, a vindication of the rights of men. Civil rights, human rights for everybody in the context of the French Revolution. She'd already written a book for children, a book for teachers and parents and so on. So she's getting her quill into the London literary market. This book sells well. People listen to what she has to say, and she expands her ideas, and a year later she writes A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. And that's her place in history, her major place in history. But she has love affairs. They are always a bit tumultuous. Her best friend has gone off to Portugal and died there in childbirth, and Mary got there just in time, and it was all very tragic, and there was an earthquake, and all that kind of stuff. But then Mary comes back. She has an Irish adventure. She comes back to London. She proposes a ménage à trois to this painter, Fuseli. Now, you may or may not know the name, but I'm sure you know the paintings of a woman thrown on the four-post bed and this monster squatting on her belly. Yeah? So is the monster Mary and he's the victim, or is it the other way around? He was intrigued when she said, let me move in with you. I cannot have a day without your conversation. His wife was less impressed, and so Mary decided to go to Paris, where she fell in love with a tall, dark, handsome American who left her with a baby, and he scarpered, and she was there in the terror with blood rolling in the gutters, and she was trying to document this all and send letters back to London, which if they had been discovered, she would have been taken as a spy, and so on and so forth. She chased her ex-lover back to London, found him shacked up with a woman on the stage, tried to commit suicide. He rescued her, and a couple of months later, she went off to Scandinavia on a business trip for him, looking for this missing silver treasure ship. Because he'd got all this silver when he was in Paris from all these aristocrats liquidating their belongings to stay one step ahead of the guillotine. And so he'd been buying up all these candelabra and God knows what, and it'd been shipped off secretly in cartons in some ship. And the ship had to decide what to do. Now, he had written against marriage. So if he was going to marry, that would be like, moving away from all his vows, his philosophical principles. Whereas if she married, it would make it clear that she had not been married to the American in Paris. She'd been passing herself off as his wife, as Mrs. Imlay. But if she went to an English church and said, spinster of this parish, then everybody would know that she hadn't been married to Imlay. And Imlay wasn't dead, he was away, but people knew that he was still around. Of course, there was no such thing as divorce then. So she had to grit her teeth, they both did, and they went to St. Pancras, old church, the one behind the Eurostar, easy access for Parisian revolutions. And they got married there. And she was blooming, she was happy, her writing was going well. A lot of her friends, rejected her because of this marriage, but, she had a wonderful William. They didn't live together. They lived in two separate apartments in the same block, so that they wouldn't have to see each other before noon, that they could do their writing in the morning and get dressed and everything, and then they would have civilized discourse in the latter part of the day, because that is how husband and wife should create a new way of being, right? That's what they were into doing. She had had a healthy first pregnancy and a healthy delivery for the first child, which she named after her dead best friend. She had a healthy second pregnancy, and she had a healthy second delivery. And then the best medical attention did something dreadful. The doctor didn't wash his hands. They didn't in those days. And she got puerperal fever, childbed fever, and died in agony 10 days later. And the widower, William Godwin, was distraught. He had a toddler on his hands and a newborn baby. He named the baby after her dead mother, which I think is a terrible burden to bear. And that little baby grew up to write Frankenstein. And that's not a book that could have been written by someone with a living mother, living feminist, educated mother. That's a book written by somebody who grew up in the So, that's Mary Wollstonecraft.